All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Tod Bouris. I'm the Director of Success, or Customer Success for Vivox. And we're part of the Unity family. We were acquired earlier this year, and we're really excited to be here. It's a great organization. And I'm here to tell you a bit about the Vivox Voice and Text products and how to integrate them into your Unity games. A little bit about the company. We're Vivox. We're the market leader in real-time voice communications for games. We've been around since 2005, so about 14, 15 years now. In that time, we've developed a lot of expertise and technology to run voice at scale. And we have a very mature platform and a very experienced team. Our solution's managed and hosted by us, and it's massively scalable. Now, how scalable? We serve over 120 million monthly active users. We serve over 100 billion minutes a month of voice. And we do this worldwide with a 99.9% uptime guarantee. So here's some of our clients. I say some because there are over 500 companies that are already using us in their games or integrating us into their games right now. And you'll notice some of the biggest names in the business. We've got Blizzard. We're in World of Warcraft and Overwatch, two of my favorite games. We're in a little game called Fortnite and League of Legends. And we're also in Madfinger Shadowgun series, which is here at Unite. So be sure to visit them if you get a chance. So why add voice to your games? I mean, there's a cool factor. It's fun to talk to your friends. But beyond that, on the business side, the metrics show that people who use communications during their gaming game more and more often than those who don't. And we also find this holds true for any platform and any game type. So voice is really a social element that adds stickiness and retention to your games that you can't get from something else. So it's a pretty tall order serving up these customers with our SLA. And how do we do all this? Well, we provide a hybrid solution. We've got thousands of bare metal servers, and they're augmented by bursts into the cloud during times of high usage or high growth. And this allows us to respond very quickly to those periods of high growth. And the growth can come from a number of reasons. One is Fortnite had a little concert a while back by somebody called Marshmello, and you may have seen it. It was a massive success. 10 million plus concurrent users were online in the concert at the same time. We had just over a week's notice that the concert was coming, but we were able to quickly scale our footprint up to several hundred servers more than we had, thanks to the flexibility of our infrastructure. PUBG is another example of rapid growth. When PUBG launched, they experienced a 10-fold growth over their initial peak concurrent user estimates. They eventually got up to over 3 million PCU. And because of the flexibility of our solution, we were able to scale with them. Now, to keep all this infrastructure healthy, we've got multiple NOCs, network operation centers, that keep an eye on things 24/7 so we can respond to events as they happen. And because we're a software as a solution, or as a service offering, we handle all the complexity of all of this infrastructure for you. Our servers handle the heavy lifting of audio calculations, like figuring out what players should be able to hear who, what players should be connected to each other in different channels. And we also handle the networking, so you don't have to worry about things like network address translation or security or bandwidth. We take care of all of that for you. All you need to do is simply integrate the SDK into your games, and you get working voice. So security is a big concern with any online system like this. But Vivox Voice is secure. We use something called Vivox Access Tokens, or VATs. They're very similar to JWTs, if you're familiar with those, and they have a couple of important characteristics, one of which is they can only be used once, and then they expire even if they're not used. So even if these tokens get out in the field, bad actor gets a hold of them, they're very limited use to them. So for development, we provide an API that generates client-side tokens for you. It means you don't have to worry about token vending services during your development cycle. This lets you get up and running immediately with no need to VIN tokens on your part. But for production, you're going to want something more secure, and that means you're going to VIN tokens either from your game servers or from some other microservice. And we actually provide sample code in a number of different languages to help you get up and running with this. So Vivox Voice is cross-platform. We're on desktop, both PC and Mac. We're on mobile, both iOS and Android. And we're on consoles, Xbox One, PS4, and notably, we're the only approved middleware provider for voice on the Nintendo Switch. But even though we're cross-platform, we provide a consistent API and feature set across all these platforms. We're also platform agnostic, and that means that any player on any of these platforms could potentially talk to any other player on any other platform. It's up to you as developer to determine the segmentation of your population. If you want players on PC to talk to just PC, if you want them to be able to talk to everybody. Being platform agnostic also means that the players aren't limited to console-specific solutions or platform-specific solutions like party voice. And a good example of a game taking advantage of this agnosticism is Fortnite. Fortnite's on all of these platforms. And now the millions of players are online at the same time. Any one of those players could potentially be talking to any other one of those players at any given time. So these are some of the features of our voice solution, voice and text solution. I'm not going to get into all of them. It's not a full featured list. But I do want to call out a couple things that are important to note. We have both 2D and 3D channels. 2D channels are what most of you probably think about when you think of voice. It's like squad chat. You're in a squad with 3 or 4 other players. You can all hear each other at 100% volume all the time. But we also provide something called 3D or positional channels. And these actually take into account the player's position and orientation in game space to provide 3D positional audio, which is really cool. One game that takes advantage of positional channels is PUBG. As you're moving around the game world, you can hear people talking and moving around you in the game space. Another important feature is that we support multiple channels per player. So not only could you have somebody in a game space or 3D positional channel, but you could also have them in squad chat at the same time. And if you look at the bottom, we provide administrative server-to-server APIs that allow you to mute and kick players if you find bad actors in your game. So Vivox tech is always evolving. And this year has been an important and innovative year for us. As everybody knows, toxicity has become a big issue for games. And we're actually working on several different tools that you can use to help moderate toxicity in your games. We've enabled server-side recording, which is a feature by which the servers can be triggered to actually record audio from a player. So if you think about it this way, you put a report player button in your game, somebody has a bad actor offend them, they can hit report player, server will save off 2, 3, or 5 minutes of audio. Your CSRs can then go in later to see if there was actually offensive action during the game and take action as necessary. We've developed speech-to-text, which is actually being tested in the field right now. So it's just what it sounds like. It's transcribing spoken word into written word. And we've done the opposite, which is take text to speech. Text that's typed in or text that's on the screen can be turned into audible voice. And of course, speech-to-text and text-to-speech are great for toxicity moderation, but they're also important when you're considering things like CVAA and accessibility requirements. And coming soon, we've got something called Couch Co-op. Right now, players are limited 1 player, 1 console, but soon you'll be able to have multiple players in the same room on the same console using voice at the same time. We've got Google Stadia support we're working on. Google Stadia, of course, is Google's streaming solution, and our voice solutions will work on Stadia if you're porting to that platform. And since we're part of the Unity family, we're integrating more tightly with the editor to make it simpler than ever to integrate our voice into your products. So hopefully this makes you understand a little bit about what the product is and gets you a little excited about getting us into your game. So let's take a look at how exactly you get Vivox voice and text into your games. So our SDK is provided as a Unity package, and you can get it from two places, the Unity Asset Store or from our developer portal, which is at developer.vivox.com. Now either way, wherever you get it from, you're going to need to go to our developer portal and create an account so that you can get your developer credentials that allow you to connect to our system securely. But the package has a wrapper in it. The wrap's what we call our core libraries. They're platform specific. And their functionality is actually extensible. So if you find that a wrapper isn't doing exactly what you want, or you want to make it something more complex or simpler, you're welcome to do that. So a developer portal has a ton of resources available to you. It really is a self-service gateway for all aspects of developing with our products. It's got a number of self-help tools like FAQs, forums, technical articles, but it's also where you can download our SDKs. It has a complete SDK library there, as well as our online docs and our sample apps, which I'll talk about one of those in just a sec. So to get started, just download and import the SDK like you would any other Unity package. Get your development credentials from the portal, plug them into the editor, and you're ready to connect to our systems. So there are a couple of important Vivox constructs that we'll talk about real quick. Channels and users. Channels are what most people think of as a chat room. Everybody that's in the same channel can potentially hear everybody else. And I say potentially because if you have a channel with thousands of players, obviously you don't want to hear thousands of players talking at the same time. So our servers take care of figuring out who can hear whom in certain situations. Channels are platform agnostic. So regardless of the platform that somebody's on, anybody in the same channel could potentially hear somebody else in that channel. And both channels and users are ephemeral. And this is important because it means that our backends don't have any kind of backing store that store information about your users or your channels. You create those on the fly using the SDK, and when they're no longer in use, the platform tears them down. So everything on our backend is transient. This is important when you're talking about things like privacy concerns. So let's look at a generic gameplay session. When your game starts, you want to initialize the Vivox Voice client, which is just a class in our SDK, single call. But you also want to start logging in the user as soon as possible. The reason for this is because it's a network call that's being made to our backend. Our backend is allocating some resources. Generally, it doesn't take very long, but there can be some latency of up to a few seconds, so you want to make sure the user is logged in before you try joining a channel for the first time. That way you can avoid the latency when you're joining that channel. Leave the user logged in, do all the operations you need to do, like responding to SDK events, or moving the channel or moving the players between channels, like when they're going from lobby to matches and back again. And then as you're getting ready to end the game session, go ahead and log the user out and terminate the Vivox client. But again, the key here is that you can keep the user logged in during the whole gameplay session. So let's take a look at some example code, get into the nitty-gritty here. This code shows you how to join a channel. And again, players need to be logged in before they can join a channel. So for the sake of this example, we're going to assume that the player's already logged in. Logging in is done in a very similar manner as this. First couple of lines construct a channel object using a couple of helper classes. Where notably you're plugging in the channel name. The channel name in this case is Squad 401. But it's really up to you as the developer to determine the channel IDs and the channel names. Then next we're going to subscribe to whatever events we want to listen to. And in this case we're listening for channel property changes. This can give you an indication as to whether or not the connection state of the channel has changed. For instance, there's been a network hiccup and somebody's been logged out. We're listening for when participants are added or removed. That's important if you want to have rosters of players that are within the audible range. And in this case, we're also listening for when a participant value is updated. And by participant value, we're talking about things like when they start speaking or stop speaking or when their volume changes. These are great events to listen to for things like speaking indicators. And then the most complex part, which isn't all that complex as you can see, is we call begin connect. And in this case, we're passing in a lambda that's going to call the matching in connect function. Now, most of the SDK functions in Vivox are asynchronous and have a begin and end function by convention. And what that allows us to do is to surround the end function in a try-catch block, and we can find out if there were any errors or exceptions thrown during the connection phase. Now, the vast majority of the time, there's not going to be any errors. So at the end of this little snippet of code, that person is actually a participant in this channel and can talk to anybody else and listen to anybody else in that channel. It's really that easy. So on the developer portal, we've got a couple of sample apps. The newest one's called TUGS, and it stands for Tanks Unity Game Sample, which is based on the Unity Tanks tutorials. So if you spend any time at the Unity site or within the Unity tutorials, I'm sure you recognize this screenshot. But this example is actually included with our SDK package. And it has a complete voice integration. And so you can just take a look at the code there, and it'll show you how to use 2D and 3D channels as well as respond to SDK events. It's really a great resource for learning how to use us. And one of the best parts of the TUG sample is some of the code that's in there, including this Vivox Voice Manager class. Now, this class is implemented as a singleton, and it's ready to use out of the box, and it includes all sorts of functionality. It's got session and channel management, joining channels, leaving channels, logging in, leaving sessions. It's got some subscribable events, some of which we talked about earlier. One notable event is when text messages are received, you can actually, before displaying that text, analyze the text, maybe run it through a profanity filter if you want to do that. And it's also got exposed members in the editor to hold your credentials. So you literally can copy and paste your credentials from the Vivox developer portal into the editor, and you're ready to go. But this really is an easy way to get going with our tech, especially for proof of concept phase, if you want to see our stuff working. So here's an example of using the Vivox Voice Manager. And you'll see in maybe 5 lines of code here, we're not only logging the user in, but we're also joining a channel. So remember that logging in is asynchronous. So what we're doing here is we're subscribing to the on-user logged in event, and then we're just calling join channel as soon as the user is logged into the Vivox system. And all that code that we saw earlier for the log or the join channel example is all wrapped up in that single join channel call. So it's really a brain-dead simple way to get started with things. So again, the SDK exposed a number of events that allow your application to listen to things like SDK state changes, incoming text messages, audio device availability. If the default audio device, input device, or output device, microphone, headset changes, you can get notified of that and take advantage of that notification. One nuance that I will mention here is looking at those first 2 events, the on-participant added event and the on-participant removed event. They act a little differently between 2D and 3D channels. In 2D channels, they act probably as you would expect. Somebody joins the channel, you get a participant added event. When somebody leaves the channel, you get a participant removed event. In 3D channels, we have something called audible voice range, which means it's the maximum distance at which a player could potentially be heard by the player. When somebody enters that sphere, because it's 3D space, it's actually a sphere, the participant added event is fired. When somebody leaves that sphere, participant removed event is fired. And 3D or positional channels are a little more complex than 2D channels, and they require a little more information, like a player's location in 3D space and their orientation. And ideally, these should be updated several times a second to make sure you've got smooth audio rendering as somebody's moving around in the 3D world. A couple of things to keep in mind are that positional calculations are handled on the server side. That means the server, again, is doing all of the heavy lifting and heavy calculations, figuring out who amongst all of these thousands, potentially thousands of players in a 3D channel can actually hear each other. This means that not everybody's getting swamped by everybody else's voice, and that 3 players in a channel or 3,000 players in a channel, doesn't matter, it uses the same bandwidth down to the client. Positional rendering, however, is handled on the client side. And that's important to note because that means that the client can handle positional updates very, very fast. So even if somebody's moving their mouse around very quickly, or they're moving through the 3D game world very fast, or they're wearing a VR headset and moving their head quickly, the audio is going to render positionally accurately on the client side. So some of the notable properties of 3D channels are the audible distance, which I talked about, maximum distance at which somebody can be heard. The conversational distance, which is the maximum distance at which somebody's voice becomes 100% volume. And then the audio fade model, and all of these are settable by the developer. And the audio fade model determines the fall-off characteristics between the audible distance and the conversational distance. And we've got 3 options there. We've got linear, inverse, and logarithmic fall-offs. And like I said, we like to make things as easy as possible for developers. So in the TUC Sample, we've got this class, Positional Voice class. And this is literally a script that you can take and drop onto your game objects that represent your players or your spaceships or your tanks or whatever, and it will handle the positional and orientation updates necessary for the system to be able to render in the positional channel. So it's really, really very simple to use. So how much does all this cost? I mean, we get the best-in-class game voice. We get the massive infrastructure. You get to use the same tech as the big guys. But we love indies, and we want people to try out our tech. So we have a free tier that allows you to use it up to 5,000 peak concurrent users for free. And this means you can get started with your development. You can go to production. And if you don't reach 5,000 peak concurrent users in a given month, it's free for you to use. Above the 5,000 PCU, we charge based on usage. So hopefully you see that it's Vivox Voice and text is pretty straightforward, very easy to use. I'll take questions now for a couple minutes, but you can also visit us at the Connected Games kiosk at the far end of the floor near the entrance. So thank you.